سمپوزیوم خاورمیانه بهار ایران، موانع و فرصت‌ها و سیاست آمریکا. مقامات ارشد نظامی، سیاسی و آکادمیک دولت‌های اوباما، بوش و کلینتون علیه جابجایی ساکنان اشرف در داخل عراق، تأکید بر مسئولیت آمریکا در حفاظت اشرف و ضرورت خروج مجاهدین از لیست وزارت خارجه. ادوارد رندل، فرماندار پنسیلوانیا 2002-2011، رئیس انجمن سراسری فرمانداران آمریکا 2008-2009، رئیس کمیته سراسری حزب دموکرات 2000. ژنرال جیمز تری کانوی، فرمانده نیروی تفنگداران دریایی آمریکا 2006-2010. آنیتا مکبراید، دستیار رئیس جمهور جورج بوش 2005-2009. توگو وست، وزیر ارتش 1993-1997. سارا سوال، عضو هیئت سیاستگذاری وزارت دفاع، استاد سیاست خارجی، دانشکده دولت، دانشگاه هاروارد، رئیس استادان در پروژه پاسخ به جنایات گسترده. لوئی فری، رئیس اداره تحقیقات فدرال 1993-2001. سفیر میچل ریس، مدیر سیاستگذاری وزارت خارجه 2003-2005، نماینده ویژه در ایرلند شمالی. ژنرال شلتون، رئیس ستاد مشترک ارتش آمریکا 1997-2001 و هوارد دین، رئیس حزب دموکرات 2004-2009، کاندیدای ریاست جمهوری.
روز شنبه 25 تیر ماه 16 ژوئیه به مناسبت سالگرد حکم دادگاه استیناف واشنگتن مبنی بر نقض حقوق مجاهدین در لیست گذاری توسط وزارت خارجه و دستور دادگاه برای بازبینی جدید، مقامات ارشد نظامی، سیاسی و آکادمیک دولت‌های اوباما، بوش و کلینتون در یک سمپوزیوم تحت عنوان بهار خاورمیانه و ایران، موانع و فرصت‌ها و سیاست آمریکا سخنرانی کردند. سخنرانان بر ضرورت حذف نام مجاهدین از لیست وزارت خارجه آمریکا و مسئولیت ایالات متحده برای حفاظت از اشرف تأکید کردند.
I just do want to say two thank yous before I start. The first is to the leadership of this organization, which has worked so incredibly hard to save 3,400 unarmed people in Ashraf and to stand up for what's right in their own country. So I want to thank all of you who have put all these together. I don't know what number of this is the one I've done, and we will free the people of Ashraf, and we will free Iran from the tyranny of the mullahs when this happens. When this happens, you will thank us, but we will thank you, because this never happens without the people. The United States cannot stand up for people who won't stand up for themselves, and you have stood up for yourselves, and we intend to support you in doing that. Secondly, it's an incredible honor to be on the platform with so many distinguished American military leaders, and I don't think I've ever done this before, but I'm going to. And since I have three generals here, I want to thank them for the Joint Task Force full accounting. Mitchell said when we started that there had been some progress, and there has been progress, and there's also been setbacks. The biggest setback since the massacre on April 8th has been the clock, because the clock continues to tick, and as of January 1st, it looks like our troops will be out of Iraq, and we cannot trust the word of Prime Minister Maliki. We cannot trust the Iraqis to keep their word in terms of the promises that they made to the people of Ashraf and to the United States of America. And I deeply regret that the American people have lost over 5,000 brave troops and many, many more than that severely injured, only to see in power a puppet of one of the most dangerous regimes on the face of the earth, which is the Iranian government. We can do better than this. We did not die. We do not want to have our folks die in vain. We will not put up with what Prime Minister Maliki is representing in the government of Iraq. I was delighted to see the Spanish judge announce that he was going to investigate Prime Minister Maliki as soon as he stepped down, which judge is now announced that he will investigate Prime Minister Maliki as a war criminal. I was delighted to see that Wes Clark has said, and then was quoted in the testimony before the Rohrabacher subcommittee, that he knows a war crime when he sees it, and what happened at Camp Ashraf was a war crime. But what looms in front of us is a far bigger war crime, that there can be no assurance by the Iraqi government that would have the credibility that we could rely on, or that the people of Ashraf could rely on. What are the reasons for keeping the MEK on the terrorist list? In 2006, when we disarmed the members of the MEK in Ashraf, we gave our commander on the ground gave a signed piece of paper to every single resident of Ashraf, saying that the United States would protect them. We did not say we will protect you until the Iraqis take over, we will protect you until Maliki takes over, or if he changes his mind, then we reserve the... We said that we would protect them. That is the word of the United States of America. At that time, when we took over Ashraf and disarmed the residents, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and we have one of the most distinguished leaders of that agency with us today, according to Colonel Morsh, interviewed every single person at Ashraf, including interrogating some of them. Not one person that they interviewed out of the 3,400 was found to be a terrorist. Well, so now we have a group of people who are under siege by supposedly our ally, who have been found by the Federal Bureau of Investigation not to be terrorists, who have been promised the protection of the greatest nation on the face of the earth, and 35 of them were massacred in cold blood a few months ago. These people are not terrorists. And this is not a rhetorical game. You see in the paper the pro-Iranian lobby is saying, well, they're a cult and they this and they that. Well, first of all, I don't believe that's true, but even if it were, so does that justify the murder in cold blood of people who are under American protection? I think not. Let's stop the name-calling and the foolishness and look at this for what it is. This is genocide, and we will not have it. The president of the Iraqi parliament recently visited with Strawn Stevenson, who chairs the European Parliament Committee on Iraq. The president of the Iraqi parliament and his delegation said that it was an extraordinarily foolish idea to move the people from Ashraf to another location inside Iraq. If the president of Iraqi parliament believes that it is a foolish idea to move the people from Ashraf to another location inside Iraq because they won't be adequately protected, then why is it the policy of the United States of America to move people from Ashraf to another location inside Iraq? The American proposal is harming the chances of getting these unarmed civilians out of Iraq alive, because the Europeans are now interested in a process where folks from Ashraf could go back. As you know, many of the people in Ashraf grew up in European countries, sometimes at some point were citizens of not only European countries, but of America. Many were educated in the West. So one of the plans that the Europeans have is that we could relocate the 3,400 members of Ashraf to save their lives to the West. Now, there are some very smart people here who know a lot about intelligence, a lot more than I do, and I'm going to let them talk about it. But I want to close by saying a little bit about why I'm in this. You know, there are, as General Mukasey said at another meeting, there's about the widest diversity of people on this group, politically speaking, of any group that I've certainly ever worked with. It's actually been a pleasure for me to actually get to know Republicans as people. I had a job which was trying to get rid of as many people as I could, get them out of office. We're not talking about the Iraqi way of doing it. And so it's been a great opportunity for me to get to reach across the aisle and get to know people and respect them, even though, of course, my job was to get them out of office as soon as I could for 4 years. And I think the thing that brings us together is that we believe in America. But I'm doing this because I'm an American. And what makes this, I don't believe an American is necessarily a better person than an Iranian or an African or a Hispanic or from South America or any. I don't believe, but I do believe the founding documents in the United States makes us an exceptional country in this way. If you look at the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, all those years ago, we established ourselves as not only a nation of laws, but a nation of hope. That we hope for something better for ourselves than what we had left. That we had a more positive view of human beings than what was currently available in the world of the late 1770s. And that we would stand not just for individual freedoms, but for hope, for opportunity, and most importantly, which is frequently forgotten today, individual responsibilities to each other, to recognize the extraordinary human potential that was available. That's the greatness of America. This is a moment to decide whether we are or are not still a great nation. We are in this for the people of Ashraf, not because we want to overthrow the Iranian government, although that would be a very good idea. We are in this for the people of Ashraf because, as General Shelton said, we gave our word. We stand up for those who are trying to stand up for themselves but don't have the means to do this. We risk being the Dutch at Srebrenica instead of being the Americans in the Balkans. We cannot give up our legacy of standing for a free people who are willing to stand for themselves, especially for those who do not have the ability right now to stand for themselves. We have to do this not for the people of Ashraf, not for the Iranian American community. We have to do this so that the United States of America remains a great country dedicated to freedom, opportunity, and personal responsibility. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for welcoming me to your gathering. This is my first time. There's a Marine here who looked a little surprised to hear that I had a claim to Navy, but then I was there as Navy General Counsel a while back. Most people think of me as an Army person, about why I'm here and how I come to be here. Because you can say, well, we heard what he did. For one thing, he was part of an administration that didn't act on the issue of the list. That would be the administration in which, in fact, part of the administration which actually put the MEK on the list in the first place. For that was a time when I served as both Secretary of the Army in the first part of the Clinton administration and the Secretary of Veterans Affairs in the second. I've had some other involvements over time as part of my professional career. We don't need to get into those at this moment. But I do want to say that that's why we're here. We're here because of the warmth, the resilience, and the desire to be free of the Iranian people. There are lots of other things that flow from that, but that's why I believe you're here. It is certainly why I am here. So let me, if I may, so that I don't repeat the areas already covered by others, and you may think that's a little difficult for me to do, or that will be covered, but perhaps I can give a different perspective, start here. For all that, Governor Dean is correct when he says that we meet here in the United States where the interests of the United States tend to dominate public discourse about international matters and the country's role in those international matters. And so, it is fair to say that from the point of view of the United States government, whether it is this administration or previous ones, with respect to Iran, they've had at least 4 considerations. Of course, the one that so many in government consider overriding, and perhaps they're right, and that is the nuclear concern. Secondly, what I think the American government would certainly believe to be the Iranian government's tendency to meddle in the Middle East and in the regional affairs of its neighbors, and certainly to the great detriment of those of our service members who serve just across the border in Iraq. Thirdly and fourthly, and for you and me, firstly and secondly, or even firstly and firstly, because of the plight at Camp Ashraf, and because we have unfinished business in this nation with respect to the MEK. Now, if you and I conclude that those are among the things that seem to percolate and be taken into consideration and to go through the decision-making process in the United States government, especially in the State Department, assuming my colleagues are willing to agree that there is a process of decision-making with respect to these matters in the State Department, then perhaps we can get a better sense of why it has taken so long to resolve matters correctly with respect to the MEK delisting. And maybe we can understand some of that, but that does not mean we can agree with it. Or we can't conclude, as I think one of my colleagues is going to say, but since he mentioned it to me earlier, that our current Secretary of State has already had more than a year to resolve it. Don't misunderstand me. I'm a great admirer of the current Secretary of State. One of the things that does not get mentioned in my bio is that when she was First Lady and traveled abroad to our to one of the locales in which we were engaged in conflict, I traveled with her, and I was then the Secretary of the Army. And when she cast her hat in the ring to run for the presidency, I was there too, encouraging her and hoping that she could win the leadership of this nation. I have great respect for her. I'm of the opinion that those qualities will bring her to a point where I will make a prediction others won't. That she will act, in great likelihood, after all the toing and froing, to do the right thing with respect to the MEK listing and to delist the MEK. That is not our question. Our question is when? How long? How much more information needs to be reviewed? The State Department has not even responded to the Court of Appeals ruling of last year just yet. And for that, I have no answer. And I think the best we can do is to continue the pressure that you exert and that these groups exert and that forthright statements like those made by my two predecessors can exert. But I believe there is hope on that issue. I am less than clear on what our government is going to do about Camp Ashraf, and it troubles me greatly. We have already stepped away. We have already turned it over to the Iraqi forces. And each day, our influence on the government of Iraq diminishes. Why? Because we are in the process of withdrawing. I think that as strongly and as loudly and as vigorously as we can, we need to continue to pressure the administration, to pressure anybody with any ability to have an influence on this, to see that the residents are not just protected, but are provided for going forward. I agree with what has been said about the disaster that arises if they are forced to relocate inside Iraq. I agree that the United States continues to have a responsibility for that, and I urge the United States to step up to that responsibility. There are, over the history of these issues, what are clearly three decision points, and they've been touched on already. Let me touch on them again. There was the decision point by one Secretary of State to add the MEK to the terrorist list, to the list of terrorist organizations. There was a decision by a second Secretary of State, Condoleezza Rice, upon review not to act to remove them. We now have a third Secretary of State whose duty is clear and who has the added incentive, or perhaps it's the added support. Let's assume that she wants to do us right. The added support of the decision by the court and of the continued hearings and statements from the Hill. I'm always disappointed when I hear us refer to those who are supporting the Iraqi government in their oppression of the residents of Camp Ashraf as the Iranians, or the Iranian nation. I'm always distressed when I hear us talk about the policies of Iran, because I am reminded, and I remind each of us, a nation is not its leaders. A nation is its people. If we remember that, if we rely on that, if that is the way we address problems, then Iran is in fine shape because of the fine attitudes and determination of its people. We just have to get its government in order, and that is the job of the Iranian people. The job of the United States is to assist them to exert all of its power, all of its influence, and every bit of its reputation as a nation historically supportive of democracy, to support that effort in every way. I think we're here for the Iranian people. That is where I started. I think our role in the United States has always been to reach out and nurture other efforts to establish, maintain, and preserve democracy. That is how we got started. This nation, in its revolution, in its birth in freedom, would not have succeeded if other nations, especially France, had not been willing to reach out and help us nurture our aspirations of democracy. And so it comes full circle. We owe our democracy as much to the assistance from other countries as we do to our own spirit. Can we do any less for the good people of Iran, whose only wish, whose only ambition is to produce the very same effort to decide from themselves how they will be governed? I thank you for the opportunity to join you. And I say this, I was once in Tehran. I was once able to walk the streets and to greet people and be greeted. I hope someday that you will invite me back there again.
It's a pleasure to be here, and you have been a great audience, not only rapt attention, but incredible bladder control as well. I am awed by, and I'm also awed by the panel. And I've been in public life for 33 years, but it's been as a district attorney, a mayor, and a governor, and the chairman of the Democratic Party. I've focused almost exclusively on domestic issues. I have opinions as a citizen about foreign policy, but I knew very little. But let me tell you, it's been a great learning experience for me. And as a result of what I've learned, on Monday I will send a letter to President Obama and to Secretary Clinton telling them, one, that the United States is morally bound to do everything we can to ensure the safety of the residents of Camp Ashraf. And two, if Director Free and General Shelton and General Conway and Governor Dean and the rest of these great panelists say that MEK is a force for good and the best hope we have for a third option in Iran, then good Lord, take them off the terrorist list. Take them off the terrorist list and put them off that. And you've done a great job inside the Beltway. And you're here in force, and you're here in numbers, and you're here with great cogent arguments, and you're winning the battle inside the Beltway. And the thing that's so amazing is our people, and I believe this with all my heart, they're genuinely fair. They have the same values that you have. They want the same things for themselves as you want for both America and Iran. And they believe in honoring their word. If the American people knew that every single resident, including the 36 who died and all those who were injured, signed a piece of paper with the American government saying they give up their weapons because we promised to protect them and we failed miserably, we were either directly or indirectly complicit in what happened, the American people would be outraged, But they don't know. And because they don't know, there's no pressure. Government's all about pressure. Governor Dean, where are you? It's all about pressure, right? Competing pressures. We who sit in the decision-making chair get pressure from this side, pressure from that side, pressure from that side. Hopefully, we withstand the pressure and do what's right. It's all about competing pressure. And right now, there's some pressure to keep the status quo. There's some pressure not to interfere in Ashraf because we don't want to upset the Maliki government. And there's no competing pressure. So we need to get out there and paint the picture for the American people. Let them know. Let them know. We're proud of what we did in Kosovo. What the American government and the American people did in Kosovo kept 500,000 Muslim Kosovars from genocide. We're proud of what we did. And if you talk to President Clinton, it's one of the single proudest things he has about his time as president. We're proud about the things we've done right. And when the Libyan crisis was at its peak, when Gaddafi was massed to commit genocide, the American people didn't want to get involved in another conflict, but they also knew that we should keep innocent people from being slaughtered. We can win this battle in the short run about Ashraf and in the long run about what's going to happen to Iran, because the American people have to be told that there is a force out there that wants to make change, that those young people that you described and the women are ready to make change, that they just need a little assistance, and they'll create a government that will share the wealth, will have common prosperity around the country, the single most important thing they need. There is a government that will give women their rights. There is a government that will treat Arab, Jew, and Iranian equally. There is a government who will respect religious freedom and tradition. There is a government possible. If we can paint that picture, we can not only in the short run do what's necessary to protect the residents of Ashraf, but in the long run we can create that third option, that it doesn't have to be conflict. As the General Conway said, the third option is regime change, but not regime change at the end of American tanks, but the regime change on Twitter, on Ping, on apps, on everything. That regime change that comes from the hearts of people. Because when the hearts of people are united in the right cause, history has shown that you can keep them down for a while. The military force and the public executions that are going on can scare them and inhibit them for a while. But at the end, that's a tidal wave that can't be stopped.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for the warm welcome. Like others on the panel, this is my first opportunity to be with you, and I must say, as I've researched your organization and tried to do my homework in preparation for being here, I salute you for who you are, for what you represent, and for what you intend to do, given time and resources. Realizing that the depth and the capacity of the panel, I tried to look at what I could offer to you that might be different from what has been said or will be said this morning. And as one of two, I suppose, career military members, I thought I would try to stay on an area of focus that had to do with strategic interest. But I'm afraid I have to admit up front that I bring to you a somewhat somber message this morning. And that is that I have tremendous concern as we sit or stand here this morning that two nations, the United States of America and Iran, are on a collision course. And if something doesn't happen pretty soon, I see, unfortunately, that those two nations are going to be at each other's throats. And so I have a sense of urgency in terms of what you do and what you represent, and a sincere hope that the third option is an option that could perhaps play and make a difference in where I see us headed today. The U.S. strategic objectives, I think, can pretty much go without any emphasis in front of this group. Our purpose in the Middle East is to, first and foremost, of course, protect our citizens who are abroad. We also want to ensure that the sea lines of communication remain open, that there's free trade, to include, of course, oil that comes from the region with our allies. We want to partner with our friends and allies in the region, and perhaps uniquely to our involvement in the Middle East, where we see the potential for ungoverned spaces and for people that would plot attacks against our nation or those of our allies, we feel a need to take action, and you see this happening in the region today. From my perspective, the strategic objectives of Iran today are first and foremost to sustain the regime. Control to some greater or lesser degree of the Gulf and the Straits of Hormuz. I think that the country intends to extend its influence to the degree that it can in the region and in the other nations. And I think leverage against all of those things is now the development of a nuclear capability. And that to me is most troubling. Where those strategic objectives overlap, I think there is potential for confrontation, perhaps even conflict. And I'd like to talk to you about two or three of those areas today where those possible confrontations could occur. First of all is simple miscalculation on the part of either nation, not understanding the impact of what certain actions could mean. There's ample precedence in the region for miscalculation. The hostages that were taken in '79, the tanker wars that I don't think really in the end benefited either side, and of course the shoot down of the Iranian airliner and the tragic loss of life that we saw in 1988. U.S. and Iranian forces are in close contact. We have forces in Iraq up against the Iranian border. We have forces in Afghanistan, and we both have forces at sea in the Gulf. And you know as well as I, tensions are always just beneath the surface in any or all of those locations. I'll share with you, it's kind of a human story, I think, of a communication that was intercepted by the folks at Dubai International Airport It took place between an Iranian air defense controller and a U.S. aircraft. And it went something like this. Unidentified aircraft, this is Iranian air defense. You are in Iranian airspace. The pilot came back, that's a negative. I'm an American aircraft and I'm orbiting over Iraqi airspace. The Iranian came back and said, you are violating Iranian airspace. Either you leave immediately or we will send up aircraft and shoot you down. The pilot came back after a second and said, Iranian air defense, this is the United States Marine Corps F-18 fighter. Send them up. I'll wait. That's not a story intended to talk to the bravado of our pilots, although they're a pretty roguish lot. I tell you the story because that's the hair trigger that we're on in the region. And so it gives us concern. I have a high level of confidence in our U.S. chain of command. I mean, the Secretary of Defense can be notified of events happening in the Gulf in a matter of minutes. I have less confidence in how tightly wound the Iranian chain of command is, and in fact, I even believe there are some rogue elements there that could act on their own. And I think an example of that is what we saw a couple of years back now in March of '07 with the capture of the British Royal Marines and British sailors. What would have happened had perhaps those people been Americans? What would have happened had they attempted to resist, thinking that help was on the way? They were badly outgunned and outnumbered. What would be the result of 15 American bodies clearly floating in international waters? You need only contemplate, I think, the possibilities. More recently, and General Shelton mentioned it, we are seeing a definite uptick in the numbers and therefore the effects of Iranian systems working their way into Iraq. As we commence our drawdown and start to withdraw in earnest, we are seeing many more units and elements of activity taking place in an effort, I think, to try to give the impression that they're causing us to leave. In fact, of course, the drawdown has been long known and well planned. In June, we had 15 soldiers killed in Iraq. That is the highest count of casualties since 2008. 9 of those come as a result of rocket attacks onto our main bases, and ladies and gentlemen, those are Iranian rockets. The other weapon system, of course, is the explosively formed penetrator. The Iraqis have had a tough time manufacturing their own, but the Iranian are of good quality, and we're seeing them in Iraq. Next door to Iran, on the other border with Afghanistan, just in the last week or so, our Marine commanders are reporting a definite, again, surge in sniper activity. And where we saw that happen in Iraq some years ago, those quality snipers were Iranians and Syrians. And so there's intrigue taking place here that, again, as has been mentioned, Secretary Panetta, in some of his first actions, is condemning heartily. And so, again, there is the potential that these miscalculations could have relatively severe impact in a relatively short order. The Middle East is the Middle East, and things happen sometimes in an obtuse fashion, and they happen quickly. And so we simply need to be, I think, concerned about that. A second area, I believe, is energy manipulation. In large measure, I believe, through our own doing, our great country has found itself largely dependent on fossil fuels. And in that, there is strategic vulnerability. And in that, there is a recession that we're experiencing that in some ways limits our ability to do certain things. The 2% reduction in Libyan oil, given their problems there, is not lost on the members of OPEC and particularly on the Iranian membership. In fact, it's interesting today that the discussion that's taking place in OPEC, on the part of the Iranians, they say, let's keep prices high because it will have adverse impact in certain other countries in the world. The Saudis are saying that, well, let's keep prices just below the tolerance level. And that way there will be no desire to develop alternative fuel means. And oil will continue to be king. Now, that is all lose-lose for the United States. But the fact is that we are at the end of that string, and that string is being jerked. And there is concern that should there be retaliation for sanctions that are being laid, should there be a reaction to potentially another Israeli Hezbollah breakout or dust-up, should the Saudi oil fields be attacked again? They have been attacked once. We believe it was al-Qaeda. But should there be any disruption of the significant oil supply, not only for us, but as importantly for the rest of the world, you can see the impact that it would have on our economy, which represents a vital national interest in my mind. And we could be compelled to act. The oil market is not a free market. It is controlled by nations that don't always want to agree with the things that we do. And in that regard, we are certainly vulnerable. There was a secret cable that has been declassified, sent in 2008 from our embassy in Saudi Arabia. I'll read it to you. The continuing vulnerability of Saudi Arabia's strategic oil and gas production facilities represents an Achilles heel for U.S. strategic interests in the kingdom and throughout the Gulf region, not to mention U.S. economic security in general. The cable concluded, in the estimation of the MOI, the Ministry of the Interior, these facilities face a serious threat from both al-Qaeda and Iran. Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, the most troubling potential for conflict is the persistent course that Iran has taken on the development of nuclear power. They would call it nuclear power. I think we would call it nuclear weaponry. Clearly, there is no need in Iran for nuclear power to provide energy. They have the second largest amount of natural resource in the whole world. There are generations upon generations of power capability in Iran, cheap power, and so the supposed need for nuclear power is questionable at best. The rest of the region is watching. Saudi Arabia will not stand by. Questionably, Turkey will not stand by without some thought towards proliferation. Perhaps even Iraq in the long term. Iraq will one day be a rich country. And depending upon how situations evolve there, you could see much more extensive use of nuclear kinds of capabilities in the region. From a U.S. perspective, President-elect Obama has said that it is unacceptable for Iran to have nuclear weapons. Now, he has not uttered those words as our president, but I think it's fair to say that every aspect of our national policy towards the development of those weapons points towards that thought process. And so again, I offer the fact that our nations, in very short order, could be on collision course. From a strategic perspective, there are not a lot of good options here. The United States is unlikely to gain an international mandate for action. America would be seen potentially as attacking yet another Middle East nation. In summary, what are the probabilities for these types of confrontations? Well, I would put miscalculation on a scale of 10, probably at a 5. I would put energy manipulation probably about a 4. But folks, I put the problems and the issues that we could have vis-a-vis this nuclear development on a scale of 10 at an 8. I think within the next couple of years, unless something happens differently from how we are responding today, Iran, as you know it, could be very different if indeed there is conflict with our great nation. So again, I endorse the third option. And I hope I inject in you a bit of a sense of urgency that sooner is better in terms of whatever influences can be manifested to try to make a difference. Let me, if I can, as a final comment, just speak for a moment about the MEK and Camp Arashaf and my own observations and experiences. I guess I'm the only member of the panel that may have had physical responsibilities for their security. And I'll go back with you and tell you that in 2004, when my expeditionary force went back into Iraq, we went into the western province and had responsibility for securing a couple of elements of MEK that were first around Fallujah and then relocated down southwest of a place we call Takata. I asked my superior, what kind of bag of worms are you handing me here? Our job is tough enough. To have a, quote, terrorist group in our midst is something that I was not prepared to take aboard. But as I dispatched some of my commanders to sit down and talk with these folks, as I visited myself, these people are not terrorists. They're no more terrorists than the people here on the panel. There was an obvious contradiction. On the one hand, we knew they had been listed by our State Department, and I have tremendous confidence in our State Department. On the other hand, we were told, and the mission remained for 5 years in Iraq, to provide them security. It made no sense. If they're terrorists, we ought to be arresting them and investigating them and making sure that they receive their just dues. We asked those people to disarm. They're the only people in Iraq who are disarmed. Okay? A decision was made early on by Ambassador Bremer that it was okay for an Iraqi to have his AK in the closet. And yet these people complied willingly and have done what we asked them to do. Now, it seems to me the press of events, and other members of the panel have played them out, I think, very nicely, are such today that we have got to reconsider our national posture towards the people at Camp Arashaf and the MEK in general. I read, as I did my homework, that the French have come back and said our initial investigation was flawed. There is no basis for the entirety of the claim. Our good friends in Europe, as has been enunciated again, the UK and the EU are encouraging us to alter our policy. And I've got to tell you, what happened recently should be a national outrage. And unfortunately, I don't see it. Let me drop back. When I trained Marine lieutenants as a young captain, our guidance to them is if you are working as an advisor to a foreign unit and there is about to be a violation of human rights, there's about to be an atrocity, try to stop it. Okay? If you can't stop it, then you walk away from it because you do not want to be a part of it. But you immediately report it, and then you do something about it. Now, if you elevate that simple tactical lesson to nations, then there's something missing here. Okay? The incident has occurred, and now there's a responsibility on the part of our nation, I believe, to demand investigation and find out who are the culpable parties. I honestly think that needs to be the next step in this affair because, as has been emphasized, we are the United States of America. We have values. We stand for something. And I think that there is a moral imperative here to make this situation right. And I think from a moral perspective, and arguably even from a legal perspective, we have lawyers on the panel, I should let them talk about that, we bear a responsibility. As long as there are troops in Iraq, U.S. troops in Iraq, we bear a responsibility for what has happened and what should happen in the future. Let me just finish by saying, though, ladies and gentlemen, after that is done, and that's got to be your 25-meter target, your 100-meter target has to be influencing that regime in some way, any way you can, to avoid this collision course that we see today. The last person that wants to go to war is a general, and I'll swear to you today that we simply don't need to see this happen. But inevitably it will, unless something is done. Thank you all for the warning.
This is also my first time addressing this group, and I very humbly join a group of very distinguished leaders and experts who offer you far more in this dialogue of U.S.-Iranian relations than I do. It's so hard for many Americans to appreciate the freedoms we have, and it's easy to take these liberties for granted when that's all you've ever known. We have an obligation to teach new generations of Americans about the value of our civic institutions and how we are so blessed to live on the right side of history. It's also important to teach them we have a moral obligation to stand with those who are still seeking freedom. When Iran's opposition movement brought millions of Iranians to the streets in the summer of 2009, demanding a free and fair vote in the presidential elections, the Iranian regime did not count on, nor did they care about, the world seeing the images of innocent, nonviolent protesters suffocated by the massive security presence in those streets, willing to use violence on its own people. Half of Iran's 70 million people are under 30, and half of the population are women. Over the last 6 months, the winds of change have arrived in the Arab region, and there too, it is the women and youth who are leading these movements. Repressive regimes like Iran, I don't have to tell you, survive on brutal tactics, but we have seen they collapse the instant their people cease to be fearful of speaking out. We need to put a spotlight on the leaders of this new wave of freedom and show how social media helps spark events in the Middle East. We need to draw lessons that could be applied to spreading freedom in other oppressed lands. This new generation understands the need for political diversity and economic opportunity, and they understand the role of social media and how it allows voices, all voices, to be heard. 60% of Iran's 3.5 million university students are women. Women have had a long history in Iran of being very strong activists. And an important standard by which the progress of a society can be measured is the women's status in that society. The main impediment to any progress or success in Iran is the difficult, suspicious regime that refuses any democratic reforms. Iran was hijacked by extremist leaders with extremist ideologies that isolated their citizens, turned neighboring countries into enemies, and continue to destabilize the region and the world. We have to continue to use sanctions, spotlight regime abuses, and understand the leverage points that undermine authoritarian regimes, such as military loyalty, nonviolent resistance, social media, and economic decline. The economic crisis is getting worse every day. Why should the citizens of a country so rich in gas and oil be facing this kind of hopelessness? Targeted sanctions should be imposed, and they should be tied directly to human rights. In the fledgling democracies in the region, we have to strengthen prospects for success by deepening commitments to ideas and policies favorable to freedom. None of this strong action or support is possible until we first revitalize the American commitment to fostering democracy and supporting freedom advocates around the world. That is what your message should be to our leaders. The United States has powerful tools in our vast arsenal of diplomacy, and my hope is that they will one day be deployed to help a free and democratic Iran rebuild into the country you all want and we want for you. Thank you.
We've heard eloquent testimony from each of our speakers as to why it's in America's national security interests to support the residents of Camp Ashraf and to delist the MEK. The MEK opposes a regime that is responsible for the deaths of American soldiers. The MEK opposes a regime that has acted and that continues to act to destabilize and dominate the region, including acting as the world's leading state sponsor of terror. So yes, we do have important national security interests involved in this issue. But there's more at stake here than just American interests. American values are at stake as well. We have given our solemn word that we would protect the people of Camp Ashraf. The protection of these defenseless civilians is a fundamental human right. This is a principle that the United States has long championed all over the world. Our voice, our efforts, our values to promote human rights cannot stop at the gates of Camp Ashraf. The fight being waged to delist the MEK, the fight to protect the residents of Camp Ashraf, this fight is not their fight alone. It's not your fight alone. It is America's fight as well. Both our interests and our values are inextricably linked in this case. To the residents of Camp Ashraf, we stand with you. We will continue to work to change U.S. policy, and we will not rest until we succeed. Thank you very much.